Good morning and welcome to all for this our seventh session of Islamic Architectural Legacy course. I welcome to all of you here, and as I requested in our group also, we will request to all of you in mid of this session when our this university's director and dean sir will come, and at that time we want to take one screenshot photograph of all of you. So please be ready for that. Now I humble request to Nasrin Madam for please start our today's session.
I think Dr. Faisal is going to join now. Shall we wait for him?
Yeah, yes, okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, good morning and welcome, sir.
Good morning, Dr. Faisal. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome
Assalamu
to
alaikum.
our classroom today.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning for all.
Good morning. Dr. Bhujan, can you give introduction about Dr. Faisal, Muhammad Faisal?
Yeah, we are humbly welcome to Dr. Mohammad Faisal, sir. Yeah, welcome from all the participants from India and from all over the world. Yes, we are happy that you are with all of us. And just I want to give the introduction of Faisal sir for all the participants. Dr. Mohammad Faisal Kazi sir, who is the head of the Department of Architecture and Interior Design and Assistant Dean for Undergraduate Studies in University of Nizwa. He is having PhD in Interior Architecture, Engineering and BIM. More than 12 years experience, 8 years professional experience in UAE, and he was involved in lot of architecture research and innovations. So I humbly welcome to sir, and just I request him, please guide us.
Actually, thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Nasreen, for this invitation for this session. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants in this valuable course, and hope I think it was successful regarding the Islamic heritage in the Islam land, and this is a part of the activities at the University of Nizwa in collaboration with the institute from India. This is really an initiative step and successful step, along with the Learning Institute at the University of Nizwa. I think, inshallah ta'ala, we will continue in such activities in collaboration with other institutes and this institute with India to similar courses in different fields, maybe also in the field of Islamic architecture, or in the field of the construction materials, digital courses, design studio courses, and other advanced technology in the field of engineering. And the architecture and interior design department, it's a part of 4 departments regarding the College of Engineering and Architecture at the University of Nizwa. At the University of Nizwa level, we have 4 colleges: engineering, pharmacy, and nursing. We have also a College of Business and Information Technology, and we have the last one, Art and Sciences. At the College of Engineering, this is quick introduction about the University of Nizwa. We have at the College of Engineering and Architecture 4 departments: architecture and interior design. We are a part of faculty member, me and Mr. Nasreen, and we have also 6 faculty members. We have the departments of chemical and petrochemical engineering. We have the department of electrical and computer engineering, and we have also department of civil and environmental. At our department, which delivered the course by Ms. Nasreen, we have 2 major programs. The first one is architecture, sciences of architecture. Now we are changing to architecture, fully architectural engineering, with 2 degree, bachelor with 5 years and diploma with 3 years. Almost 160 credit hours for bachelor and 91 for diploma. We're covering different courses, design studio at level almost 6 to 8 design studios, different disciplines like construction courses, advanced building technology courses, digital courses, practical and hand drawing courses. Besides, you know, the other disciplines like surfaces, like civil courses, structure courses, and all the needed for the regional needs here, requirement of the alumni and the industry field. We have the other program, which is interior design program. Similarly, we have program for architecture, program for bachelor with around 149 as a for Bachelor of Interior Design, Bachelor Engineering in Interior Design Technology. This is the proper title. And we have also Diploma in Interior Design. Similarly, we have Civil Design Studios. We have also Advanced Interior Design Studios until Interior Design 3. We have also similar courses for construction and interior design-wise and materials, finishings, all those programs at the end with a graduation project for almost 1 year, starting from GP1 and ended by GP2. I do believe in the architecture department and interior design at the University of Nizwa. We are at the beginning. We are number one all over the Sultanate in the field of interior design and architecture. We can consider that because we have a rich study plan. We have a good faculty, skilled faculty member with different background. We have from India background, we have from Syria, we have from Iraq, we have from Egypt, also we have from Jordan, so from Oman background. So it's very rich in comparison with the other department in the Sultanate. I will not take more than time, but we are really glad and honored for this first course. And I need to thank Ms. Nasreen for this this collaboration. She initiated this collaboration, and we hope it will continue in such courses. I encourage all the participants from the Sultanate or out of the Sultanate to check the status of University of Nizwa, because we have international students and we have a lot of fields for collaboration at the level of study, undergraduate, or at the level for postgraduate, inshallah. This is a small brief. I will give the floor to Ms. Nasreen if she wants to add something else. And thank you for all. Nice to meet you, and I wish a successful course ending for this online course. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir. We are such a great pleasure that you are with us. And now I request to all the participants, please on your video so that we will take one photograph. Yeah, Hussein sir is also with us now.
He's joined. I cannot see him.
Yes, he is here with us.
Actually, I'm not able to see him.
Just a minute. Yeah, now we can see. Yeah. Most welcome. Yeah, Dr. Hussein sir.
Good morning and Assalamu alaikum, Doctor.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu wa rahmatullah.
Dr. Bahjan, how are you? Dr. Bahjan, Ms. Nasreen, Dr. Faisal.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Good morning, Dr. Hussein.
Good morning. Good morning for everybody.
Good morning, sir. Good morning. Yes. We are happy that you are with all of us. Yes. I am Bobde from Maharashtra, from India. Yeah, I'm working as the director for this Heritage Foundation. And we are too happy that University of Nizwa and such the great authorities are with us. For our participants, just I want to introduce about Dr. Hussein sir. Professor Dr. Hussein Abdul Qadir sir is around 38 years of academic experience in teaching, consultation and research, published over more than 48 conferences and journal papers, supervised many MSc and PhD theses, working in Iraq, Yemen, Jordan and in Oman. His BSc from Mosul University, Iraq, Electronics and Communication, MSc and PhD from France in Electronics. So, being as a student of Electronics and Civil Engineering, and then I was also entered in History and Archaeology. So, I am very happy that you are with us, sir. Humbly welcome to you. Yeah. Please guide us. Yes. Please say a few words for the guidance of all our participants.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Really, I am proud to join an architecture lecture, especially in Islamic heritage. The lecturer, Ms. Nasreen, is one of our faculty members in the College of Engineering and Architecture, Department Architecture and Interior Design. Really, this is not the first time which I follow your lecture. I followed through the record sent by Ms. Nasreen to me. I was very interested, really, when I saw some of the mosque in Iraq, like Al-Milwiya in Samarra, which I really lived there for or visited this minaret, and even I go through this path, elliptical path or spiral path there. And you know that Iraq really has two Khalif empire, one from starting from Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, Al-Khalifa Ali, Khalif Ali ibn Abi Talib, who constructed the Islamic capital in Kufa, south of Iraq, and then come Al-Abbasi Khalif, who really developed and progressed the architecture, not even the architecture, even the scientific, really process scientific. I remember that during Al-Khalif Harun al-Rashid, he sent gift to King of France as a clock. They didn't know what is the clock, how it is work. And this is generated and created in the in Iraq and during the Islamic epoch in the Arab world and in the whole world. Really, I am very interested to join this lecture. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank all the participants who are really engaged in this lecture and would like to know and to hear about the Islamic heritage, which will be presented by Ms. Nasreen. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you very much for your presence, your gracious.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And now I request to all the participants again, please on your video. Sayyid Ahmed ji, Mohammed sir, Sayyid Anwar Wali Saab, Shah Jawariya sir. Yes, request to all. Abid Sayyid ji, Tahira Malik ji, Samir Rahman Saab, please on your video. Arshia Sayyid ji, please on your video. Yes, okay. So here are the participants from the 22 states of India, like the Delhi University and Srinagar University to Kerala University, from abroad the India also, and from our because of this our Nizwa University, we can enjoy this architectural legacy. Otherwise, it's not possible to all of us such in great manner. So once again, thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you. And yeah, now I request to Nasreen ji, please proceed. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Hussain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nasreen. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Shall I start presenting, Doctor?
Yes, please.
You can see my screen, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Welcome everyone for the day 7, Islamic Architectural Legacy in the Lands of Islam. Today's topic will be the Mamluks and the Ottomans. So first we will start with the Mamluks. So a little bit of historical context we'll understand about the Mamluks. When the Mamluks took power, Egypt and Syria had been ruled by different members of the Ayyubid dynasty. Mamluk literally means slave or owned. They entered Islamic history as military slaves recruited by the Ayyubids in 13th century. to form an elite corps. This corps consisted of Kipchak Turks from southern Russia. They were known as Bahri Mamluks. The Bahri Mamluks were succeeded after 1390 by the Burji Mamluks, who were purchased by Caucasus region. They were not ordinary slaves, they were lords of their free-born Egyptian, Syrian, and other subjects. They rose to power initially under the Ayyubids, whom they succeeded in 1250. Their rule ended in 1517. So the Mamluks were purchased at a young age. They were boys of pagan or even Christian origins. They were trusted because they were without any social ties and without any political affinities. They were brought up in the barracks of the citadel of Cairo. Here, they received religious and military education and became Muslim horsemen and fighters. They retained their Turkic names. There was a mutual relationship between a slave and the patron that purchased him. While the power and prestige of a patron depended upon his recruits, the career of the slaves remained attached to the patron. Royal succession was not a hereditary basis. It was conducted through the elections of one of the great emirs from among the Sultan's elite corps of Mamluks. Under the Mamluks, Syria and Egypt witnessed a significant degree of accumulation of wealth. Like Fatimids and Ayyubids before them, the source of wealth in Mamluk state came from various kinds of land taxation and trade that was fostered through the Red Sea between Mediterranean and Indian Sea. The Turkic Mamluk culture at the court coexisted with the Arabic culture of the indigenous Egyptian and Syrian populations. Mamluks were patrons of many pious foundations which had a significant impact on the monumental topography and urban culture of Egypt and Syria. It was over the course of Mamluk rule that successive patrons commissioned works of architecture. The urban space itself became an increasingly competitive and dense urban environment. A competitive discourse developed among the monuments sponsored by the Mamluk elite. The monuments were a mix of pious benefaction. Benefaction means donation, erected to serve the urban community. The self-interest as commemorations of their founders, benefactions and self-interest are always present in Mamluk architectural patronage. So today's objective, we will explore the ways in which Mamluks inscribed their political power and presence on the urban landscape of Cairo. And how did they transform the monumental topography of Cairo? On which parts of the city was Mamluk patronage activity focused? So we will learn about architectural innovations in Cairo through one of the main case study, the construction of Sultan Hassan complex. So coming to the urban growth of Cairo, under the Fatimids and Ayyubids, Fustat and its surrounding region expanded and Cairo became increasingly a zone of commerce, residence and other functions. And under Mamluks, Cairo became a focus of monumental architectural patronage. Throughout the city, there are various areas where Mamluks concentrated their building activities. One is on the tip of the Muqattam Hills, which was the locus of the Mamluk citadel and palace. So this is the location of the Muqattam Hills, and this was the location of the Mamluk citadel and palace. The Mamluks erected extraordinary monuments along the avenues in their day. Many of these Mamluk buildings were the most monumental structures that had been erected within the medieval urban fabric of Cairo. Yet the impression of such monumentality, however, has been reduced because of urbanization, often at a large scale and especially in the modern period. So just to recap from our last class from Fatimids period, we had understood that Jawahar had constructed this Cairo, right? So that is called as Al Kahira. You can see the location of Al Kahira over here. And this was the Fustat. So we understood about this urbanization already. And during that session, we have already covered some of the mosques which is coming under in this Al Kahira area. So that is the mosque of Al Hakim, Al Akmar, Al Azhar. So we almost understood that. So in today's session, we will understand Sultan Hassan complex. So this is the Sultan Hassan complex, and this is the mosque of Al Rifai next to it. So the complex of Sultan Hassan was erected below the citadel and its palace. Radiating out from the complex of Sultan Hassan, there are series of main arteries. So, here you can see, this is the location of Sultan Hassan with respect to the citadel. A series of main arteries that connected the old cities of Al-Qatai, Al-Askari and Fustat to the south, and to the north, the former precinct of the Fatimid city of Cairo can be arrived. So if you go down, it is like Fustat, you will get Fustat, and if you go up towards north, it is the old city of Cairo, that is the Fatimids Cairo, Al-Qahira. The complex was built on one of the most prestigious sites of the city and was the most enormous monument built at its time. Its size is a clear response to the significance of the site. The complex was built at the foot of the citadel, with the palace rising above it on the great square of Rumaila. So this is the great square of Rumaila, which is adjacent to the hippodrome and was used for Mamluk military parades. This was very important site to claim for the construction of the complex. The complex was oriented towards the palace and its chief entrance, the Bab al-Azzab. So here you can see this is the palace, and this is the Bab al-Azzab. This is the gate of the palace, and this is the entrance of the Sultan Hassan complex. So it's almost in a same axial. It was in a visual communication with the palace and its main point of entry. Up until 1911, Sultan Hassan complex was a freestanding monument that stood alone, very uncommon features of buildings in medieval Cairo. In 1921, the mosque of Al Rifai was built on the eastern side of the complex in Mamluk revival style. So this is the site of mosque of Al Rifai. So here you can see the aerial view of the Sultan Hassan complex and also the Al Rifai mosque. This mosque shows many innovations in terms of function, architecturally, forms and decoration. The complex functioned as a madrasa for the 4 schools of Islamic law. It was the first in Cairo to serve the dual function of a congregational Friday mosque and a madrasa. Many examples followed after it. The building is constructed from cut and dressed stone, much of it quarried from the pharaonic sites in the vicinity of Cairo. The stone has been traced to the sites of Giza and Memphis. To elevate the structure load of the monument, the upper sections of the building is actually stone-covered brick construction. The inscriptions on the interior identifies Sultan Hassan as the patron and a person named Muhammad Bilik al-Muhsini. He was the building supervisor. And al-Muhsini is referred to in historical sources as a significant emir of the age who had much experience in civil engineering and projects and finances. So as a complex, the building housed 4 schools of Islamic law, that is Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki and Hanbali. There is one area for each madrasa. Each madrasa had its own courtyard, enclosed divan and pool. So here you can see this is the madrasa for Hanbali, and this is the madrasa for Hanafi. This is madrasa for Shafis, and this is for Malikis. So each of them, you can see they all have their own courtyards and their own water bodies, and they also have their own Ivans. These madrasas provided spaces for teaching, but these activities also took place in the Ivans arranged around the central courtyard. So here, this is the main central courtyard, and this main central courtyard also had Ivans, as you can see here. And one of the Ivan is used as a prayer hall, and next to that, you can see this is the Sultan Hassan Mausoleum. So coming to the courtyard and madrasas, the courtyard is framed by four enormous, as I told, four enormous Ivans of different proportions. They are built to create a sense of relative hierarchy within the space, with the largest one designated as the chief prayer space. And it also had mihrab and mimbar. The largest madrasas were devoted to the Hanafi and Shafis, with 56 and 52 living units assigned to them, and 44 living units were given to the Hanbalis and 22 to the Malikis. Those numbers reflect the relative importance of the four schools of law in the Mamluk period. So here you can see the madrasas. The four madrasas offer spaces for teaching, instruction, and accommodation. 4 floors rise at the corner of the complex. Each madrasa has a courtyard and a pool as its own private communal space protected from the public mosque area. The 4 floors of the madrasa housed students who were given permanent accommodation in the complex. In order to maximize the size of the courtyard and to increase the size of the Great Ivan for Friday prayers, these auxiliary functions of the madrasas needed to be built into towers arranged around the corners of the complex. So coming to student dorms, the inner facades of the atria rising above the courtyard have additional windows that brought light into the living spaces of the students. There are also air wells that were intended to bring light into deeper zones of the building at a further from the atria. The features also enhanced air circulation here. So all of these efforts made the spaces of the corners fully functional. They were not only usable, but also they were livable. Tomb of Sultan Hassan. The projecting tomb is framed by 2 great minarets. The facade is massive, and there is an attempt to modulate the facade by the addition of circular windows and medallions, and also arched windows that have recessed niches and mukharnas over here above the windows, rising above them. The position of the tomb directly behind the Qibla wall is very unusual. So here the portal at the end of the complex projects out 17 degrees. So here you can see it is not straight, it's slightly projected around 17 degrees from the line of the facade, which made it visible from the citadel. The facade has an intricate pattern of fenestration, and there are around 8 windows stacked on top of each other. Each pair of stacked windows corresponds to an internal floor of the students' dormitories. The portal is monumental in scale, and it is comprised of recessed arch surmounted by mukharnas, as you can see here, and ribbed half dome with a monumental staircase. This is the monumental staircase leading from the level of the street up towards the entrance. Such devices addressed the shifting level of topography. So the portal is decorated with ablaq panels and geometric patterns. Some of the ablaq panels contains inscriptions for the example of Shahada, or Shahada of faith, that is, there is no God but Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, as well as the names of the Prophet Muhammad and the first 4 Orthodox caliphs to follow after him. So here you can see those inscriptions. Next, here you can also see a lot of ablaq patterns over here. The portal is divided into a series of carved panels that are recessed along the sides flanking the main entrance are knotted with patterns of calligraphy set inside them. The panels lining inside the arch use different colors of marble, including banded stonework in black and white. This is a technique called ablaq that is well known in Syria. This technique was brought to Cairo in this period. There are other details of large floral patterns and smaller carvings displaying flowers and lotuses. These are floral motifs that were taken into Mamluk art and architecture from Chinese porcelains and textiles, which were avidly collected by the Mamluk elites. The Chinese floral art extended from the mosque of Sultan Hassan to the art of the illustrated book, as well as to illuminated Qurans. These motifs from East Asian art traveled through objects and found their way into Mamluk art and architecture. So coming to its connection with Anatolia, there is the possibility that the portal of the Sultan Hassan complex reflected a far-flung design modeled from Anatolia. A fairly compelling formal relation exists between the 2 portals in Cairo and Shivas. Shivas means this is the name of a city in Anatolia. Many of the Rum Seljuk madrasas had minarets that rose above their portal, which are absent from the Great Mosque complex of Sultan Hassan. So how was it that this concept of designing a facade was communicated over geographic areas? So the answer could be, for this question, might be related to the mobility of early modern craftsmen, builders, and their workshops. The construction of the monument might have stimulated the movement of craftsmen from neighboring regions, and hence architects and builders might have come from Anatolia to Cairo. So different kinds of materials or media are used in the decoration of the complex. The interior panels reflect the usage of different media and sources. The ablaq technique is used in the vestibule and in the corridor leading to the main courtyard of the complex. These panels are reflective of Syrian building traditions which pre-existed the construction of Sultan Hassan complex. So coming to the entrance vestibule, the entrance vestibule is remarkable for its masonry. The space is surrounded by 3 mukarna covered vaulted recesses. So these are those recesses. And the arrangement of the central dome flanked by half domes is a feature common to Armenian and Byzantine buildings. It is possible to expand the zone of influence beyond the central and eastern Anatolia to the regions of Armenia. So in the courtyard, one can see that the doorways which lead to the madrasas are discreetly positioned between the monumental madrasas and marked by ablaq masonry. The floor is also treated with an extraordinary pattern of ablaq marble. Coming to the mihrab area, in one of the Ivans, the prayer hall, the interior decoration of the courtyard is concentrated in the mihrab area here. So the mihrab is made of colored marbles flanked by openings that led through the Qibla wall into the tomb. Rising above the walls, sheathed in the, again, ablaq, you can see the ablaq patterns here. There is a monumental carved plaster inscriptions you can see over here, composed of excerpts from the Quran executed in the Kufic style. Kufic script was an archaic choice because most of the Qurans were written in the cursive scripts. So in the space where the worshippers gathered for prayer, there were a series of chains. You can see here chains suspended from the inner surface of the Iwan that supported glass enamel lamps. This space was illuminated at night time. There are so many lamps that they resemble a forest of lights hanging over the prayer space. So coming to the decoration of the tomb, the lower section of the tomb is decorated sumptuously by, again, Ablak masonry in colored stone with a frieze carved, this is the frieze, carved from wood that was painted and gilded. The inscription is in a monumental cursive script again. Rising above the corner of the tomb's interior, there were mukarnas, components which were also fabricated from wood and painted. So you can see that over here, mukarna component. The opulent decoration that we find concentrated in the Qibla wall extended to the interior of the tomb. The tomb was designated as a special place that was originally intended to house the body of the Sultan. But it was also a place where his elite bodyguards were assigned after his death. So it was also intended that prayers and recitation of Holy Quran would be made here. So now we will end here with the Mamluks and also the architecture in Cairo, and we will go to Istanbul. And we'll start the Ottomans. So here you can see the Istanbul in these views. So let's start with the little bit of history also. In this map you can see Ottoman Empire, Safavid Empire and Mughal Empire. So the diagonals, what you can see in this direction, all these are the Ottoman Empire. So this is the Safavid Empire, which is covered with the Iran, Tehran and all, in Isfahan. And then the opposite diagonals, you can see it is Mughal Empire, included India, Pakistan, etc. Coming to the historical context, the early modern period witnessed the emergence of three Islamic empires, that is the Ottomans in the Mediterranean from 1299 to 1923, the Safavids in Iran from 1501 to 1736, and the Mughals in India 1526 to 1857. These polities increasingly adopted an imperial identity via territorial consolidation, centralization, and bureaucratization. So consolidation means creating their government and political institutions. Centralization means to own their control over the conquered territories. Bureaucratization means again creating a large administration, institution, etc. The three empires cultivated courtly cultures that grew out of their predecessors, such as the Rum Seljuks and post-Mongol successor states of Anatolia. The Mamluks in Syria and Egypt, the Timurid Turkmen polities in Iran and Central Asia, and the Delhi Sultanate and its successors. The Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals inherited a Turco-Persianate visual culture from the Mongol Ilkhanids and their Timurid Turkmen successors that ruled Iran and Central Asia, with incursions into both Anatolia and the Indian subcontinent. The three early modern empires combined local architectural traditions with the international Persianate cultures of the post-Mongol Eastern Islamic lands. Each one of these empires created its own recognizable imperial artistic and architectural style with distinctive modes of ornament. During the early modern period, urban projects and architectural patronage practices in monumental scales remarkably transformed the cityscape of each empires, latest capitals, namely Istanbul, Isfahan, and Delhi. Previous capitals were Bursa, Edirne, Tabriz, Qazvin, Agra, and Lahore. These were overshadowed by these new capitals, where innovative architectural and decorative idioms became invented in court workshops. Besides the Timurid Turkmen, Mamluk, and post-Mughal Anatolian architectural traditions, the Ottomans enthusiastically engaged with the Eastern Mediterranean, Byzantine, and Italian architectural cultures. Ottoman monuments in the new capital, Istanbul, reflect this intense architectural dialogue, especially during the late 15th and 16th century. So let's understand the objective of this part of the session. In this session, by way of focusing on single monument, namely the Süleymaniye Mosque complex in Istanbul, commissioned by Sultan Süleyman from his chief court architect Mimar Sinan. We will discuss 16th century Ottoman architecture, culture, and practices. In which ways were elements from Roman, Byzantine, and Italian Renaissance architectural traditions selectively integrated into Ottoman architectural idiom? And how did the Ottoman Sultanic mosques of Constantinople make direct references to the international prestige of the city's premier 6th century Byzantine church, that is Hagia Sophia, now called as Hagia Sophia, functioning as a leading Friday mosque of the new capital? And how does the Süleymaniye complex differ from the Hagia Sophia and previous Ottoman mosques in terms of spatiality, scale, materiality, and ornament? What are the novelties of mosques designed by architect Sinan, who served as the Ottoman chief court architect for half a century during that is from 1539 to 1588, during the reigns of three sultans, that is Suleiman I, Selim II, and Murad II. So this will be the objective of the session. Here we'll also understand a little bit of Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was a Mediterranean polity whose territories extended over 3 continents by the mid-16th century, that is Asia, Europe, and Africa. The empire grew from Anatolia and the Balkans to parts of Hungary, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and North Africa. The Ottomans ruled over a diverse population, including Muslims and non-Muslims, from southeastern Europe, Anatolia, and the Arab lands. As a world empire, it combined Turco-Mongol, Perso-Islamic, and Romano-Byzantine traditions of universal sovereignty. So Ottoman centralization and imperialization projects started during the reign of Mehmed II from 1446 to 44 to 81. The conqueror of Byzantine Constantinople in 1453. This conquest, which ended the Roman Byzantine Empire, led to the territorial unification of the Ottoman lands that were until then divided between Asia and Europe. Each of half of the continental divide had a separate capital city, that is Bushra in Anatolia and Edirne in Europe. The new Ottoman capital, Constantinople, became a cosmopolitan site of interaction between the Islamic, Perso-Turkish, and European Renaissance cultures. The name of the city, Constantinopolis, was not changed, and its previous medieval Arabic name was retained, that is Constantiniye. This name coexisted with another pre-Islamic name, that is Istanbul. This continuity of nomenclature exemplifies the self-identification of the Ottomans with the Roman Byzantine legacy of their territories, known since medieval Islamic times as the lands of the Romans. The Ottoman sultans began to see themselves as heirs of the Roman Byzantine emperors. Hence, as the continuators, of the Roman heritage as on ongoing imperial projects. After the conquest of Constantinople, Mehmed II declared himself as the Sultan-e-Rum, that is Sultan of the Roman lands. The Ottoman empires became a pan-Mediterranean empire with the defeat and incorporation in 1517 of the Mamluk Sultanate in Syria and Egypt. Thereafter, the empire became a dominant naval force and more engaged with Eastern Mediterranean trade. During the reign of Suleiman, the North African city-states, that is, except Morocco, became Ottoman's vassals, thereby transforming the Eastern Mediterranean into Ottoman lake. Taking under their control the pilgrimage routes to Mecca and Medina during Selim's I reign, that is 1512 to 20, provided the Ottomans with another layer of political legitimacy and supremacy in the larger Islamic world. From then onwards, the rulers of the Ottoman Empire claimed the dual title of both Sultan and Caliph of the Islamic lands. So here, the Ottomans engaged in artistic conversations with the European visual culture. During the reign of Mehmed II, he invited Italian artists and architects to his court. The Venetian painter Gentile Bellini resided in Istanbul. His naturalistic oil-painted portrait of Mehmed II is a significant example of the exchange between the Ottoman and Italian Renaissance courts, beginning with the mid-15th century. Oil painting was an innovative new technology even in the Renaissance Italy at that time. So here, coming to the Hagia Sophia Cathedral, like Ottoman manuscript painting, Ottoman architecture combined elements from multiple sources. In Istanbul, the new capital city of the empire, Ottoman urban transformations were realized through the dialogue with the city's Roman Byzantine past and contemporary Italian Renaissance concepts. Upon the fall of the Byzantine capital of the Ottomans, the city's most famous and prestigious monument, namely the Hagia Sophia or Saint Sophia Cathedral Church, built by Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century, was converted into a Friday mosque with the addition of minarets and mihrabs, and subsequently minarets were increased in number. Besides being the first intervention within the urban landscape by the Ottomans, the monument is significant as an architectural model for future sultanic mosques in the city. Ottoman sultanic mosques frequently made references to architectural features of Hagia Sophia, particularly its grand hemispherical dome and half domes. So here you can see the plan of Hagia Sophia, which is having at the center grand dome, and these are the two half domes which are abutting this central dome. These cross references connected Ottoman architecture to the Romano-Byzantine heritage, much like the Umayyad monuments of Syria, Palestine, and Spain did centuries earlier. So here you can see a hand sketch drawn by architect Le Corbusier in 1911. When he visited here to Istanbul in 1911, captures the rigid geometry of the structure, a cube with a dome on the top. Ottoman monuments we will discuss in this session are situated in the hilly triangular peninsula, surrounded by fortified walls, namely Byzantine Constantinople proper. The peninsular city is surrounded by the Marmara Sea, Bosphorus, and the Golden Horn. You can see that here. So this is the triangular peninsula. So this is the Sea of Marmara, and this is Bosphorus, and this is the Golden Horn. The peninsular city was traversed by the Mies Avenue, with two branches used by the Byzantine emperors for ceremonial processions. So this is that Mies Avenue. So Byzantine emperors, they used to, in these traverse avenue, they used to use that for their processions. Topkapi Palace and the new mosque were Mehmed II's two major urban projects, which are significant for understanding city's transformation into Ottoman capital. So here you can see the Topkapi Palace. This is the location, and this is the location of Mehmed, Mosque of Mehmed. This significant, we can understand city's transformation into Ottoman capital. The Topkapi Palace was built at the eastern tip of the peninsula next to Hagia Sophia. The site of Topkapi Palace was the city's ancient acropolis, and Mehmed II's new mosque complex replaced the demolished Byzantine church of Holy Apostles along one branch of the Mies Avenue parallel to the Golden Hornet. So here it was Holy Apostle before, and there after demolishing Mosque of Mehmed came up, and here was an ancient acropolis. So there came up the Topkapi Palace, and both were connected with this avenue. The two monumental complex of Mehmed II are connected with this branch of the Mies, and was used as a ceremonial route by the Ottoman sultans. The second branch of Mies, parallel to the Marmara shore, that is this one. This is the second branch. So running parallel to the Marmara shore was blocked off by Mehmed II, 7-towered citadel, built adjacent to the Golden Gate. So thereafter, this branch of Mies lost its former ceremonial importance as the procession avenue that connected to Byzantium of Rome. Thus, the Ottomans appropriated and reshaped the Byzantine architectural legacy and urban layouts of Constantinople. Here you can see the Topkapi Palace. It is one of the major palaces that survived from late medieval 14th and 15th century Islamic world. This Ottoman palace was built on a hilltop around 3 courtyards with a series of loosely arranged structures fulfilling diverse functions, rather than being a single building. The palace complex adopted the layout of Islamic palaces with its multiple courtyards. So this complex consists of 3 consecutive courtyards. These are the 3 consecutive courtyards that progress from public to private areas reserved for the Sultan and his household. The 3 courtyards are surrounded by extensive gardens along the Marmara Sea and Golden Horn. The first courtyard facing Hagia Sophia is cut off from the city by a curtain wall punctuated with towers. So here the Byzantine Great Palace built by the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, which is adjacent to the Hippodrome in Constantinople, was also composed of multiple courtyards surrounded by gardens. The ruins of that palace were deployed as a quarry for precious marble panels and columns used as spolia in Mehmed II's adjacent new palace complex. So the positioning of the Ottoman palace next to the mosque of Hagia Sophia highlights the religious and political power of Mehmed II as the new ruler of the city. In contrast to the vertical monumentality of the Ottoman Sultanic mosques, it is the horizontal arrangement of multiple courtyards with that defines the monumentality of the Topkapi Palace. Coming to the Mehmed II new mosque complex, is surrounded by an enormous complex without any precedent in Ottoman architecture. It was built during the same years with the Sultan's new palace, which replaced the earlier palace he had constructed at the city center. These two new complementary sultanic edifices mark the administrative and religious nuclei of Mehmed II's imperial authority in the new capital. The mosque, with its innovative domical superstructure, made a clear cross-reference to Hagia Sophia. Its funerary garden behind the Qibla wall, intended for the future tomb of Mehmed II and his queen, expressed his image as the new Roman emperor of Constantinople. Here we can see the plan of mosque complex of Mehmed. The mosque complex has a bilaterally symmetrical geometric plan. This complex has an axially aligned, perfectly rectilinear layout. You can see here 8 madrasas and 4 here and 4 here, and there is a preparatory madrasa over there, and then there is a hospice and a hospital, guest house, garden, and this is the ablution. And this was the mosque, and then the mausoleum. And you have a library and elementary school also over there. So the mosque complex, which I told that it is a bilaterally symmetrical geometrical plan, axially aligned, perfectly rectilinear layout, having 8 madrasas on both sides of the mosque, are accompanied by 8 preparatory schools behind a funerary garden, where 2 additional public services monuments, that is hospital and hospice. So here they were providing free food and lodging for up to 3 days for travelers. The mosque marble paved courtyard, this whole courtyard, what you see here, it's marble paved with a central ablution fountain surrounded by domical arcades. So you can see that domical arcades over here. It proceeds to the prayer hall over here. The large hemispherical dome covering the prayer hall has raised over unprecedented tympanum arches pierced with windows. The main dome was abutted by a half dome on the Qibla wall. This was another innovation. 3 smaller domes covered the side spaces near entrance of prayer hall. While the domical superstructure of the mosque was inspired by the Hagia Sophia, the symmetrical rectilinear layout of the grand complex itself was influenced by Italian Renaissance architectural treatises with the ideal city plans. Therefore, Mehmed II's mosque complex exhibits the integration of selective elements from the Roman Byzantine and Italian Renaissance architectural traditions into Ottoman architectural culture. This revolutionary edifice provided the model for future Ottoman Sultanic mosques complexes, accompanied by the tomb gardens of successive sultans. Coming to the chief architect Sinan, he was the chief royal architect at the Ottoman court between 1539 to 1588. During the reign of Suleiman I, Selim II, and Murad III, he was a Christian convert recruited for imperial services from the Karaman region in Anatolia, that is Kayseri. During Selim I's reign, the distinctive architectural style of Sinan refined the Ottoman tradition of dynastic architecture that evolved in Istanbul. So here you can see the Suleymaniye Mosque complex. We just understood that dynastic tradition was shaped during Mehmed II's reign by a synthesis of Ottoman, Islamic, Roman, Byzantine, and Italian Renaissance architectural cultures. But now, Sinan's mosques did not introduce any new models, but refined the system of proportions and domical superstructures of Ottoman mosques, and his increasingly light-filled mosques with innovative windows, compositions, and seemingly weightless centralized dome stood out with indigenous variations of domed superstructures. The mosques designed by Sinan are sited not only in the capital Istanbul, but also in Edirne and on major routes. The many other mosques he designed for cities in the provinces were built by assistant architects trained by him. Based on architectural drawings, these mosques are distributed throughout the lands of the Ottoman Empire, from the Balkans to the Arab provinces. In this part, we will focus one of the mosque-centered complexes designed by Sinan for the ruler Sultan Suleiman. The Suleymaniya complex can be thought of as a reinterpretation of Mehmed II's complex. As in Mehmed II's complex, there are multiple dependencies surrounding the central precinct of the mosque, but their arrangement is less symmetrical and less rigid. This fluidity departs from the Italian Renaissance concept of ideal city planning. Based on single point perspective and symmetry, instead the Suleiman complex was built with a greater attention to the topography and also scenographic planning principles, that is the panoramic view of the complex in the cityscape. Rather than building the complex on a single platform, Sinan carved the hilltop into multi-layered terraces. The central mosque rises on the top of the hill, while the surrounding dependencies are built in a lower platforms. Hence, the complex dominates over the panoramic landscape of the city and displays its components to weave from Galata and the Golden Hornet. So coming to the Istanbul's Cairo's skyline, dominated by domes and minarets, are comparable to one another. The hilltop mosque in the lower here, this is in Cairo actually. So here you can make out the differences of architectural characteristics of Ottoman style and the style of Mamluks. So here you can see the thin, slender minarets, and these are the style what you get from Mamluks. So this can be very easily distinguished. Coming to the Suleymaniya complex plan and aerial views. So this is the Suleymaniya complex and the aerial view. This is the plan. We'll understand that in a better way here. So this is the plan of the mosque of Suleiman, and here this is the mosque. This is the mosque. This is the marble courtyard with fountain, and this is the mausoleum of Sultan Suleiman, mausoleum of Hurrem Sultan. And here you can see medical school, first madrasa, second madrasa, and third and fourth madrasas are there. Then you have the public bathhouses, hadith school, and at the back side, hospital, public kitchen, hospice. So the mosque-centered Suleymaniya complex comprised all these dependencies with different social, religious, and educational functions. The triangular area here in this corner is the tomb of architect Sinan. So the king had donated this particular land to him in the same premises, like a honor for this architect. So he had built his house and also bathhouses over there. And then as a symbol, as a landmark at the corner, he made his tomb. So he had designed it before itself, architect Sinan. Coming to the stepped madrasas. The madrasas that face the Golden Horn are adapted to the hilly topography of the site. The stepped construction of the madrasas allows the mosque complex to grow organically on top of the hill, giving the mosque itself full visibility without any obstruction. Sinan's intervention of layering the hilltop by means of several terraces enabled the complex to dominate the panoramic cityscape, thereby providing the potential viewer with a scenographic staging of the mosque complex. So here we will understand the minarets are situated at the four corners of the mosque's marble paved forecourt, while the shorter ones with two galleries are located at the north and longer ones with the three galleries are placed at the south. The differing heights of these paired minarets contribute the pyramidal silhouette of the mosque. According to Sinan's autobiography, the 10 galleries of the minarets symbolized Suleiman's identity as the 10th Ottoman Sultan. The mosque's Arabic foundation inscription refers to its founder as the 10th and mightiest Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. So coming to the exterior versus interior, the Byzantine churches, the interior is more important than the relatively unarticulated exterior. In Ottoman architecture, and particularly in Sinan's mosques, the exterior and interior are equally important. The structure of interior space is clearly legible from the exterior spaces, exterior facades. In Hagia Sophia, you can see the interior of Hagia Sophia. Interior is covered with shimmering Byzantine mosaics and precious multicolored marble revetments. This creates a mysterious and dimly lit interior space in which architectural structure is masked by lavish surface ornaments in multiple media. In contrast, the control of light in Hagia Sophia, the Suleimania Mosque stands out with its spacious and brightly lit interior space. Windows that descend all the way down the floor flood the mosque interior with light. The ground level windows provide views of the surrounding garden. This is an outward looking interior space in which the windows that pierce the walls and dome bases become primarily ornaments of Sinan's architecture. Unlike the Hagia Sophia's surface ornament that hide the dematerialize its structure, Sinan boldly articulates the structural skeleton of his mosque. The clearly delineated arches emphasize the structural strength and durability of the edifice. Rather than concealing its materiality, the minimal use of ornament in Sinan's mosque contrasts the ornament of surfaces of Hagia Sophia. Coming to the interior decoration inscriptions, here he used only curvilinear and cursive calligraphy known as the Thuluth script, and was designed by the court calligrapher Hassan Karahisari. He eliminated the aesthetic complexity of Persianate calligraphy that juxtaposes various scripts. He used only curvilinear cursive calligraphy known as the Thuluth script and made it bold in scale. The idea behind this calligraphic aesthetics is not complexity and intricacy, but rather clarity and legibility. The purely Quranic inscriptions liken the mosque to paradise and invite the congregation to perform the prescribed prayers in order to gain acceptance into paradise. So here in the Kufic scripts, we have noticed that it is they are using either straight lines or angular forms. But in this Thuluth script, curved and oblique lines can be seen. So 1/3 of each letter is almost sloping here. So coming to the interior decorations in Iznik tiles. Only the Qibla wall and the mosque facade facing the fountained forecourt are sparsely decorated with Iznik tile revetments. This is the first monument in which blue, white, turquoise Iznik tiles have been transformed with the new color scheme that introduces tomato red. These underglaze painted tiles were produced in the Anatolian city of Iznik. The innovation in color schemes occurred during Sinan's tenure as Ottoman chief architect. The chief architects were in charge of Iznik tile industry ever since in reign of Mehmed II. Until this point, Persionate colored glazed tiles inspired by Timurid Turkmen examples were used in Ottoman architecture. In conjunction with some blue, white, turquoise underglaze painted tiles after the invention of the new color schemes of Iznik tiles. Persionate color glazed tile work was abandoned in Sinan's mosque. The blue, white, and turquoise underglaze painted Iznik ceramics were inspired by Chinese models. The Ottomans introduced red to this color palette, which harmonized with carpets that were mostly red and blue. The white background of Iznik tiles were also in closer harmony with the white stones and marble revetments of Ottoman mosques. The brick-based architecture of Iran and Central Asia used tile work in different color schemes, with minimum or no white dominated. Instead, blue, turquoise, green, and yellow they were using. Coming to the materiality and the spolia, the marble and granite columns used from antiquity onwards all over the Mediterranean were one of the major decorative elements of Suleymaniye Mosque. The four colossal red granite columns of the central domed baldachin were transported by ships from Alexandria and Baalbek and existed in Istanbul. The numerous smaller columns and marble panels collected from diverse archaeological sites literally and metamorphically involved the whole empire in the construction process of this complex. Coming to the Ottoman funerary mosque complexes, have tomb gardens behind their Qibla walls, a special privilege not granted to patrons of other mosque complexes in Istanbul. The sultans left their marks on the hilltop of the city, on which their mosque complexes featuring their tomb gardens are situated. These funerary mosque complexes were linked to each other through imperial processions on special occasions, such as the enthronement of the new sultan, during which he visited the royal tombs of his ancestors, or before and after the military campaigns. Tombs of deceased Ottoman sultan were systematically commissioned by their heirs, by their sons, never during their own lifetime. Unlike the practices of other dynasties, these were built imperial tombs expressed legitimacy, dynastic succession from father to son, testifying to a strong self-consciousness about the continuity of the Ottoman dynastic lineage over the centuries. So here you can see the interior decoration of Hurrem Sultan's tomb. Hurrem Sultan was the wife of Suleiman Sultan. The octagonal tomb of the queen, located off axis behind her husband's tomb, was built by Sultan Suleiman. It has a light-filled, cheerful interior decorated with Iznik tiles that have naturalistic floral designs. The motifs include blossoming spring trees and flowers that invoke paradisic connotations. The decorative elements can also be seen as an allusion to the persona of the queen. So her name was Hurrem, meaning smiling and joyful. So the same kind of interiors have been done for her. So coming to the interior decoration of the Suleiman's tomb, in contrast to the austerity of ornament in the Suleimania mosque, the Sultan's tomb is highly decorated like a palatial pavilion. The decorations include Iznik tiles, calligraphy, and glittering semi-precious stones set into the pointed decorations of the dome, again as a reference to the aesthetics of the Dome of the Rock. Precious columns are used inside and outside of the Sultan's tomb, which are lacking in tomb of Hurrem Sultan. This is related to the hierarchical concept of decorum in Ottoman architecture culture. The Sultan's tomb reflects his incomparable higher rank than his wife, both in its elaborate plan, more somber interior, its Iznik tiles with abstract patterns, excluding naturalistic blooming flowers, and its prestigious materials have been used here. So now I'm going to end for this session, but this Ottoman architecture of architect Sinan will be continued again because there are many more monuments which were constructed by architect Sinan, which are very significant and also very beautiful. So I'm going to continue that even in day 8 session. So for this, thank you for your attention. And today's assignment will be, it is not a like question and answer, the theoretical kind of question I'm not going to ask as an assignment. So here you are going to make a little bit of artistic kind of assignment. So creating Iznik tiles or ablak patterns. So materials required is you need to have a A3 size plain white sheet or any paint media, or even if you have a marker pens, you can use that. And you can use a small geometric box which is having a ruler, a compass, and set squares, small set squares, 30 and 45-degree set squares. So if it is not available during the pandemic, you are not able to purchase them, then it's okay. You can do it freehand sketches. So preferably use A3 size sheet with white background. And I'll share with you some of the works which our students have done. Our students, they had done, when they came to the first level of architecture course, like introductory classes as the design fundamentals. There, they were not introduced as Islamic architecture, but we just randomly and very abstract way of representation of rhythm, repetition, and all we tried. So I'll just share you some of the works our students have done. Something like that you can create with Iznik and ablak. And also you can look into this mosaic fiancé patterns. So in that patterns also you can see the jigsaw kind of puzzle kind of patterns were arranged. So if you want, you can create that. Or in Islamic architecture, we have come across so many different kinds of like stucco ornaments. Also, we came across a lot of vegetal forms. So you can take any of that as a concept, and you can create patterns. So for that, what you have to do is first you need to on the A3 size plain sheet, you need to put grids. So grids sizes of your choice, and the grids should be vertical lines, horizontal lines. Then you can take diagonal lines. You can also take hexagons. You can also take circles as your grids. Then on top of that, you can start creating. First, you create one pattern, maybe in 5 centimeter or 5, maybe in a little bigger grid. Just create one pattern, and the same pattern go on repeating it until the whole A3 size sheet. So that will be your exercise, and this is going to be little interesting for you. And maybe in our class we have not only from architecture, also from other field, historians are there. So for you all also, it's going to be little interesting. So now I'm going to end this session. Over to you, Dr. Bhujan.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot for this wonderful session. And we are really thankful that for the complete time, our Dr. Hussain sir is also here. So it's a really wonderful session. Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you. I would like to say a short word about really this interesting courses presented by Ms. Nasreen and organized by you. Really, many thanks that you took us on a tour around the Islamic world, really in different country in the world, showing the creative and innovative architect in the Islamic world. And Alhamdulillah, even in the modern civilization we have, she passed away, Allah yarhamha. You know her, I think, Zoha Hadid,
Yes, Zaha.
architect.
Yes,
Zoha Hadid. She left her fingerprint in the modern civilization. Many thanks for all of you. And I have one comment, like to be considered with the other specialists, how they cool during summer and heat during winter. Such a huge building, such a big building without using any AC, air conditioning, fan cooling, or heater for heating. This is really also very interesting to be studied and investigated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I want to just present the works of our students on this Arabic patterns. I'll just share once again.
In our all sessions, these all assignments are too wonderful because they are not only theoretical, but it's too practical. It's too good.
Yes.
So these are the works of our students of first semester. When they come to the architecture course, we will ask them to, we will introduce them with the drafting, and also we just make them to learn how to do some patterns, creativity, and all that. So using grids behind. So here you can see some of the patterns, what they have created here. So this is what I'm just trying to tell you all. So here you can see there is a grid behind. So on that grid, they have tried to use that. So in this particular session, in these classes, we didn't introduce them as a Islamic architecture, but we just gave them as a repetition and rhythm. That means they have to repeat the pattern what they have created, and that gives a rhythm, something like that. So here you can see they have used just pencil sketches, as well as some of them they have used the colors. So I'll share with you all this one. So I just wanted you all to understand what is the assignment. So here you can see the grid. So we have the horizontal lines, vertical lines, diagonal lines. So also there is a circle. Okay. So on top of that, this particular layer you can create. This is your creativity. So here also you can see a lot of assignments. So in this particular grid, you can see it's a hexagon, vertical lines and diagonal lines. So taking that as a grid, creating patterns again. So this kind of work you can apply for Iznik and also for Ablat styles. Also, you can use it for any floral patterns which is related to Islamic styles. I hope you all understood the assignment.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Once again, I request to all the participants, please on your video. Once again, I request to all the participants, please on your video. Yes.
I will say thank you for all, and
Yes.
Dr. Badjugan, that with the effort of our faculty member in the College of Engineering and Architecture at the University of Nazwa, and one of them, Mr. Steen, okay, Alhamdulillah, we rank the first in Oman. Our college ranked the first in Oman, even before Sultan Qaboos University. Okay, Alhamdulillah, and many thanks to invite me in order to attend this lecture. Thank you for all. Thank you very much.
Doctor. Thank you for your presence, for your gracious presence.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And tomorrow we'll meet again. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think tomorrow is a holiday, right? Friday.
Sorry, tomorrow is a holiday. Tomorrow is a Friday, so it's
Tomorrow is
holiday.
holiday.
Day after tomorrow we'll meet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam, Doctor.
Welcome, sir. Thank you.